Welcome to Wine for Normal People, the podcast for people who like wine, but not the snobbery that goes with it. I'm your host, Elizabeth Schneider, author of the Wine for Normal People book and certified wine dork.
And I'm MC Ice, just a wine-loving normal person.
This podcast is sponsored by Wine Access. Go to wineaccess.com/normal to join my wine club and wineaccess.com/WFMP to see what I'm drinking right now. Listen in the middle of the show for more details. Bruno Corneaux is the proprietor and vigneron at Domaine Divio in the heart of the Ribbon Ridge AVA in Oregon. On the recommendation of many listeners, I added the Domaine to my list of places to visit when I was in Oregon last year. And to me, it was like an oasis in the desert. Bruno is originally from outside of Beaune in Burgundy. His wines were among the best I tasted on my trip. I found a combination of elegance, fruit, earthiness, spiciness in both the Chardonnay and the Pinot that I found, as you have listened to, if you've listened to any of the Oregon podcasts, kind of lacking in nearly all the other wines that I tasted. And I was fortunate enough to visit on a day when Bruno was there. And I had a great conversation with him about his philosophy and why his wines showcase the best of Willamette. And we today are so lucky to have Bruno here because he runs Domaine Divio with his wife and his friend and partner, Andre Weil, who he's known since he was a chemist in Dijon. But he is also the director of viticulture and winemaking at Northwest Wine, which is a full-service growing custom crush winemaking facility. And given his schedule, it took us a while to get this on the books, but I am so glad to have you here, Bruno. Thank you so much in advance for sharing your story, and thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. That's my pleasure to be a part of your podcast. I really enjoy what you're doing.
I'm going to first ask you about your background because you grew up in the Haute-Côte de Beaune in Meloisé, right? Did I say that right?
That is correct. Yes, Meloisé, a small village about a few kilometers north of Beaune, in what we call the Haute-Côte de Beaune, which is not the fanciest part of the Beaune area, but good enough to understand a little bit of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay and the philosophy behind being a Burgundian and trying to make the best wine possible.
So what I love is I actually, because I'm such a nerd, I wanted to see exactly where it is. It looks like it's an 8-minute drive from Pommard, 11 minutes to Volnay, and 16 minutes to Beaune in the car. Is that right?
Yeah. It's really in a circle of great names of places that have been known for centuries for making great wines and putting this part of the world on a map of amazing wines, definitely.
Your great-grandfather planted in the region. It was your grandfather who really developed the vineyard. So can you talk about the Haute-Côte and what it was like for them? Because I think it was a very different time when they were both there and both getting started, right?
Yeah. The Côte de Beaune has been known for making great wines since pretty much the early days of the medieval time. But then they were farmers, and the grapes or the wines were purchased by négociants and appreciated by the nobles of the region. The farmers, either in the villages or in the Haute-Côte de Beaune, were farming not only grapes, they were multiple crop farmers. So my grandfather started to grow grapes again after the phylloxera period as part of the diversity of crops you could grow on a farm. So my grandfather had cows and horses and chicken and pigs and you name it, but they were doing also some vegetables and a little bit of hay for the animals, all kinds of crop growth on the property. So grapes was a part of it. And it was originally like everybody in the village and everybody in the villages around was just for personal consumption. So they planted vineyards on some of their lands that was the best exposed for that. And they were getting cuttings or planting plants from a nearby nursery or just the neighbors. And they were planting what was common at the time, that was Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, but a lot of Gamay as well,
yeah.
Aligoté, which is another traditional variety, particularly in the Haute-Côte de Beaune, and a little bit of Pinot Blanc as well. So those grapes variety were planted in my grandfather's vineyard late 19th century, and then was taken over by my grandfather that wanted to develop a little bit more of the, I would say, the commercial aspect of it, especially during the two wars. The demand for alcohol, I would say, was up. And at this time, people were drinking wine just like we drink water nowadays.
It was a very tough time, I think. So I think people needed to anesthetize themselves against.
Right.
I mean, the war was right on Burgundy's doorstep. Did you ever read the Wine and War book?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
It gives you such a great idea of how difficult it was for the vigneron of the time to just try to make it and try to figure out how to survive. One of the really interesting insights that I have figured out that I don't know if this was also the case in Burgundy, but in the 1960s and 70s, when you talk to the families that were in Bordeaux, you know, we think of Burgundy and Bordeaux and Champagne as being these places that were full of wealthy people. And Burgundy is, of course, the most farmer-like of them all. But we think of these wines garnering huge amounts of money. It wasn't necessarily like that until a little bit later. And although the wines of the Haute Côte now are kind of getting expensive, it was not like that when your grandfather decided to start a co-op, right? So can you talk about that and why that was really necessary?
Right. So mid-60s, when my grandfather developed his own brand, he realized that, especially in the Haute Côte d'Or, it was not very easy to do some marketing, especially when you're on your own and sell your wine when you're from not such a prestigious village, and pushing your wines through either distributors or restaurants in Paris. That's something you know how to do. So they had some amount of wine they couldn't sell just because they didn't have the marketing, the channels to distribute it. So with several of his friends in the Haute Côte d'Or, they decided to get their efforts together to create something that would push their sales a little bit better. And that's where they created the co-op. So it was definitely a commercial way to try to push their wines a little bit better than a real effort for volume or whatnot. It was more very commercial aspects of it. So they created the only one that still exists of co-op in Burgundy that is based in Beaune. At the time, it was called the Cellar of the Haute Côte, and it has been named like that until about recently, about I would say 15 years ago, they changed the names to the Grand Cru Cellar or something like that. But anyway, it was a way to really get together the people who had the challenges in selling their wine. And it became really, really popular from the 5 guys that started that. And nowadays, there's probably over 700 members.
Gosh. What's your impression of the co-op system, though? I mean, your grandfather started this, so Burgundy does not have a lot of wine, and mostly all of the places that have AOCs have high-quality wine because they haven't expanded to places that are not good. But do you feel like co-ops get a bad rap?
They could, especially in the places where there are a lot of co-ops, a lot of people not doing wine for the sake of putting in bulk for quality, but trying to move volumes. It has changed a lot in the last 10, 20 years. Co-ops really focused on quality, on trying to put a lot of procedures in place for quality, getting recognitions on their research for sustainability. A lot of them have modernized their equipment, going to the best quality equipment and farming the best way possible. A lot of them have certifications on being organic or by being some parts being biodynamic. So it has changed a lot. So
well, that's good.
There's no more like relation between being a co-op and bad quality that exists anymore. And the one in Beaune, there's a lot of producers getting their fruit into the co-op also because they know the wine's going to be treated well with the best specialists that they hired for that. And then the production is going to be moved into the channels that they deserve to exportation, for example, and facing on their appellation, I would say. Like now, these co-ops, you can find pretty much all the appellations of Burgundy.
Wow.
And a big bunch of Grand Cru. If you are a farmer that has, and you know it has been like really break into small pieces during the French Revolution.
The Napoleonic Code just wrecked Burgundy.
Some growers, they have 3 rows of this,
Right.
3 rows of that, 2 rows of this, 5 rows of that. So sometimes it's actually not worth making a cuvee out of those 3 rows because they generally have the volume that requires for a cuvee. So for them, it makes sense to bring the grapes to the co-op, and then they're going to gather several producers of the same appellation and create a volume that is worth a cuvee and make the best of it.
I didn't realize that the Grand Cru, I thought the Negociant bought all of that Grand Cru stuff, but it's interesting that they would also do it in the co-op. And those people are less merchants and more farmers.
Right. Yes, exactly. So if you're a farmer and then you, being a member of the co-op gives you more freedom on doing what you want with your grapes. Selling to a negociant, you don't have much control, neither on the price or the destination or the blend or whatnot. Like the members of they really have power of say during the meetings or whatnot on what the destination of their grapes going to be and what market and price points and everything.
So when you were younger, did you do vineyard work with your so you grew up in the vineyards, and my second question, I want to hear more about that, but my second question is, many people that I speak to who grew up in vineyards, all they think about is working not in a vineyard when they are little, and then they just want to get out and they come back to it. Did you have that, or did you have the experience that you knew you always wanted to do it?
No, I had to work in a vineyard because that was a family business. Right. So I worked vineyard a lot when I was a kid. Every opportunity when I was not in school, I was sent in the vineyard, and I didn't dislike it, but for me, that was not my career goal. So when I graduated from the university into biotechnology and biochemistry, I didn't have in mind to take over the vineyard. And we didn't have I would say, acreage large enough for me to be sustaining my family. So I didn't think about that as the career for me. But then working in pharmaceutical lab for some time, I was going back to help the family when I had taking some vacation or during harvest systematically. I realized that actually it grew up on me, and I decided that might be the good path for me. Growing the grapes and making wine, not necessarily on my family place, but I wanted to discover more of it. So that's where it came into place that I traveled the world and discovered some other places.
Did your family still have land in the Haute-Côte or no?
Yeah, and it's all mine now because I inherited it from my parents, and then I purchased my sister's share from her.
So what do you do with it?
So my cousin is also in the business and is farming his share, and is farming my own vineyards as well at the same time.
So it's ready for you if you ever decide that you want to do some of that. So you decided to go to school for enology eventually, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And then you also got a master's degree, which is extra. So you're super nerd. And then you traveled the world. Can you talk about all of the places that you traveled, including setting up the vineyard in Tahiti that won awards? And then, as part of that, a lot of the places that you decided to go were New World. In fact, all of them, right, were New World. So why did you decide to do such a dramatic turn? Usually the story is I did a harvest in Australia, or I did a harvest in New Zealand, or I did a harvest in Napa, and then I came back and I did one in Champagne or Bordeaux or wherever. But you did not do that. Now look at where you are. So I'm very curious to know how this evolved.
So right after my degree, I went to Oregon to have a discovery of the New World and the techniques and the potential for Pinot Noir. And that's when, at this time, I realized how much I loved Oregon. It was probably the best place on earth to grow cool climate grapes, close enough to what I've been used to in Burgundy, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay particularly. But then I wanted to explore more, so I went to South Africa, discovered another environment, another world actually of farming with larger fields, with different varieties. At the time, I was working in a really, really big company. And
was it in
Stellenbosch? It was in Stellenbosch. So I realized that was what I didn't want to do.
Right. Good.
Working in a Jewish facility environment. But then wanted to travel more. I got an opportunity I was really into Chardonnay. And I did my diploma internship in Chateau de Puligny-Montrachet,
Wow, yeah.
And that's where I discovered, because we didn't have much Chardonnay at my parents' vineyard, a little bit, but not much. And we were not making high-level wines with it. So I wanted to learn more about it. So I discovered the real Chardonnay world at the Chateau de Puligny-Montrachet. And then I wanted to explore a little bit more of that. So I got a job at a place in Macon, a négociant, but it is making wine out of the grapes he purchased from the best vineyards he could find in Burgundy. So I was working with only Premier Cru and Grand Cru there.
Wow.
And pretty much all of them. So that was really an amazing experience for me. And I worked there for a while until I decided I wanted to explore more while I was still at the time. So I went to Napa and worked for Newton Vineyard for a year there. And
that must have been a big shock of how they make Chardonnay in Napa versus working with Montrachet.
That was also another way of looking at things. And we're making Cabernet there. And I was responsible for determining what kind of real phenologic variety they had in the vineyard, because they had some blocks they planted several decades before, and they were not sure what variety. So I was in charge of remapping the vineyard as well. And then when I came back to France, I've been approached by this former professor of mine at the university, who was the contact in Tahiti, wanted to develop a vineyard.
It's crazy.
And I was very intrigued to that. I was still young,
yeah,
and wanted to explore more, and decided that was an amazing challenge for me.
Certainly.
So my wife and I were not married then, but we decided to move there and try to manage this challenge. And we did. I tried.
What did you grow?
That was very challenging.
Yeah, I'm sure.
It was not easy to find terrain to develop land that we could use. But we found an owner on one of the atoll, the atoll of Rangiroa, where we could develop something. And then my first duty was to take the coconut trees down and prep the land a little bit.
That is really different from Burgundy.
And then I got in touch with the research center of vine development in Montpellier, and I had them send me some cultivars, different cultivars. So over the 3 years I worked there, we tried 80 different cultivars on the land.
Oh my gosh.
And because of the environment, humid and hot and warm all the time, tropical, the vines grow all the time. So the growth was really, really fast. So I could really test a lot of different vines and conditions, and I did a lot of trials. Within the 80 different cultivars, there was one that was showing a good potential, that was Carignan. I've been able to do some rosé and red wine and white wine with this the same grape. It was resistant to the temperature. It was growing steadily. It was giving me one harvest every 6 months. So that was
gosh.
Well, some varieties was giving me one harvest every 3 months. That was too much.
Yeah.
That was not really easy to manage for me. So Carignan was also quality-wise, was giving me a really good wine to work with, which is, it's a traditional grape grown in the southern France, in Spain, in Central California. So it was a variety that I knew how to manage. So I planted 10 acres of this and started to make the first commercial wine. And after 3 years of developing this, my wife and I decided to go back to the US, going back into Pinot Noir, because I was really missing Pinot Noir and Chardonnay that I definitely couldn't grow in Tahiti. So the first commercial wine was released over there. So I was pretty happy. It got some medals at the Paris Fair. So I was pretty proud of that.
It's amazing.
Considering the growing conditions and the chat. So we went back to the US, and I reconnected with my older friends in the Willamette Valley. And after some time spent in Washington State, I found a a way to reconnect with Oregon.
You did all of these projects that were very unusual. A lot of times when you speak to French producers who have experienced things in the New World, they are really surprised at the technology, how technology is employed. You were in California, you were in Oregon, Tahiti, you were choosing which technologies to use. But some people are excited about it. Sometimes they are completely appalled by some of it. Is there anything in all of these experiences that you can remember yourself saying, oh my gosh, we would never do that, or I would never do that, or I definitely want to do that? People have tried very hard to minimize the differences between Old World and New World, but there are differences between the philosophies and the technologies also. And it's not because the Old World is behind, it's because a lot of times people see these technologies and they say, no, I'm not going to do that. Was there anything like that where you were like, nope, not for me, or yes, definitely for me?
I'd never approached this that way, but I understand what you're saying. I'm very open-minded. So for me, everything is good to be taken as long as it fills up your philosophy and the approach you want to have. In my case, it's the minimal approach is the one I'm really embracing. That said, being able to monitor some fermentations or whatnot with technology, I don't have to worry as much. Not being interventionist, but being more having an eye on things a little bit closer without just putting your ear in a barrel and saying, well, I heard it bubbles, but I'm not sure that. So I like to be able to know where, and if I have to react, knowing when and how. It's more like having the potential of knowing what's going on. But at the same time, you can take what I loved about the New World is everything's possible and you're free to do whatever you want, if you want or not, which is more my approach, which is the fact that it's not because it's there that I want to use it. Actually, I want to not use it, but knowing that if I needed to at some point, I could.
I feel like I hear that a lot. A lot of French and Italians say that they hope that they never have to use the techniques, but to know that they exist is very helpful. And that's really the idea behind getting a degree, is just to know what is possible if you ever hit that, and you hope that you never have to use it. That's kind of the thing that I hear over and over and over again. It's kind of interesting. You're saying it also. Why did you decide on Oregon and not, I mean, you could have made Pinot and Chardonnay in Overberg or Walker Bay and in South Africa or Santa Barbara. Why did you and Isabel decide that you were going to do Oregon, and you were picking up your life from Tahiti, not from France? But I mean, you're moving to semi-rural Oregon. Your wife has multiple master's degrees. So how did this happen that you decided, okay, Oregon's the place we're going to set up in this farming community from Tahiti? And you didn't have children at the time, right?
Well, yes, exactly.
So that's helpful.
The different reasons to that. The first one is because, like, as I said, like, it was I fell in love with Oregon on my first day. So the people was the first reason I wanted to be here. There was a sense of community that I really couldn't find on the other places I've been to. Tahiti as well, but the growing environment was not for Pinot Noir. So in my heart, there was Pinot Noir I wanted to grow, and Chardonnay. And
you're never making a sparkling over there that's going to be the acidity levels that your sparkling has.
Yeah. No, the community, definitely, the way the people really want, there's still the feeling of the pioneers being here, like being the last frontier, like everybody has to help each other to survive, kind of. I mean, I really love that. Being French, we have always had these dreams of the far west, and obviously Oregon, the Oregon Trail, right? The last year, that's really what it is. The access to the great national parks.
Yeah, beautiful.
All these image of America that I really wanted to be part of. But I've been combining this with being such a great potential for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. I couldn't see anywhere else I could do that. I could achieve this. So for us, it's making sense.
You did not buy land right away. It's not like you set up the domain right away. You worked for a few other people. You got to get more of a lay of the land. And how long did it take you to figure out that you wanted your own domain, and what were you looking for? And really, the thing that you are very passionate about is Ribbon Ridge. So what about the AVA makes it so special for you? And you really waited for the perfect site, didn't you?
Well, there are two things. So working with some other vineyards and all over the Willamette Valley have been giving me the chance to explore and taste and see what for me would be the best opportunity. But then as much as I can remember, I always had somewhere in my head like a dream of creating my own building, my own business and my own vineyard, my own brand. There's the will and there is the money behind it. I mean, it's what you want to do and it's what you can do.
Right.
Then tasting over and over and looking at those vineyards, for me, Ribbon Ridge was really the closest to what Burgundy can offer in terms of soil, even though the acidity of the soil might be quite different. My approach was the clay content in the Ribbon Ridge, which is also a marine sedimentary type of soil, like Yamil Carlton, is different by the content of clay. The clay level is really high. It's very similar to what I've been exposed to in Burgundy. So for me, that was one of the reasons. The other reason was it was providing to the grapes and the wines a tone, a style, a texture. All the wines I tasted, that was also something I was looking for. The Burgundian, like very elegant, delicate, silky, tannin, spicy at the same time, like floral nose to it, and developing this mushroom character when it ages. That was really what I was looking for. So yeah, we looked about 2 years. We looked for the perfect site, and we found the spot that we purchased and decided to call Clos Gallia in 2014.
Why did you call it Clos Gallia, and why did you call the domain Domaine Divio? It's a good story.
So I'm from Beaune and my wife is from Dijon. Dijon is the capital of Burgundy, as we know. So it links to our roots. So I decided to call Divio is the early name of the town of Dijon. That was my link to my roots. Domaine, of course, because in Burgundy, all the estates are called Domaine. So Divio is my link to Dijon from the early days. And Divio in Latin, or at the time in the Gaulish Latin, it means the sacred place. So that was also very sacred in my heart.
Yes, that's perfect.
And Clos Gallia means the Gauls. So I'm a Gaul. I was born in France, which was Gaul at the time of when
Romans.
Divio was exactly. So Gallia means the estate of the Gauls.
A lot of your fruit is estate grown, but not all of it is, right?
That's correct. So I still buy grapes from all the different AVAs because I still have in my soul the Burgundian way of looking at, we call that les climats, right? This little patch is very different from the patch next to it just because the elevation is a little bit different, or the raw exposure is different, or just the slice of rock in this particular patch makes the wine different. It's what we used to call terroir that has been misused so much that we would prefer to call it climate now.
Yes.
In Oregon, I found these different climates as well. So I wanted to explore each of those. And Pinot Noir being so sensitive to the place it's growing on, so I really wanted to emphasis on what these different climates could give to the same technique of making Pinot Noir.
So you make them in the same way with stuff from different climats.
Well, most of these grapes I'm buying are from vineyards I am farming also.
Well,
so
isn't that nice, right? Your other job really, in a way, you almost are like a co-op or a negociant also working for Northwest Wine. You know, it's not a brand necessarily. It's a custom facility, right?
Yeah, somehow, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
We'll take a step away from the podcast to thank our sponsors this week. Wine Access Wine, ACCESS.com/normal is how you will join the wine club with all the selections that I handpick. They're based off of my experience of tasting and looking for things that are really typical and high quality in each of the regions that we're representing. The upcoming shipment will be Italy, which I am in love with and I spend a lot of time in. So I hope that you will consider joining. In addition, you can go to wineaccess.com/WFNP and see the fantastic wines that I am drinking these days if you need some new ideas of things to explore. Use either of these websites, you're going to get 10% off your first order. Wine Access were rated the best wine club by New York Times Wirecutter. They're the official partner and wine provider of the Michelin Guide, and they really are the best place to discover limited production wines from around the world. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to go to wineaccess.com/normal, and you're going to join the wine club so that you can get the shipments for the rest of the year. What fantastic wines we have coming up. I'm really excited for this. And you're going to go to wineaccess.com/WFNP and shop from their site. Their wines are a collection of some of the greatest hits. Sometimes those wines are available again in new vintages. Sign up to be notified when the vintages are back in for some of these wines, and you can discover new things all the time. Sign up for their email. Check out wineaccess.com/WFNP. Get 10% off your first order. Do it today. If you want great wines, this is the place to go. Also, don't forget, if you want to help support the podcast and keep us going, what we do requires a lot of time, a lot of effort. And although the podcast is free to you, it's not to us. It takes a lot of time and equipment and subscriptions and all of those things. And in order to cover those costs, we need Patreon. So patreon.com/wine for normal people is how you can join the community. You get so much back for being part of the community, great interactions, fun discussions, live events, and so much more. Join patreon.com/wine for normal people and help keep the podcast alive and get a lot out of this amazing and growing community. Also, don't forget, Wine for Normal People classes. If you want to dork out for 2 hours live with me and a bunch of other people, it is like a live podcast. winefornormalpeople.com/classes. Check it out today. Now let's get back to this amazing show with Bruno Corneaux from Domaine Divio. You do sustainable farming, mostly organic and biodynamic. It's got to be very difficult. It's very hard in Burgundy to acquire those certifications and to do it that way because of the mildew issues. Do you find the same thing in Oregon? I know it's a little drier there. So do you irrigate? How do you work to make biodynamic organic work? And climate change has probably helped a little bit since you've been there.
Yes and no. No, you're right in the fact that it's important that we have to focus on the grapes no matter what. So that's the most important thing. Developing a vineyard in a virgin area like Oregon, like there's so much potential that on land that has never been touched with vines before, which is so different than what I've been knowing in Burgundy. We've always had vineyard for thousands of years.
Thousands of years, yes.
Right. Developing a new vineyard, that was also an exciting part. Choosing the right rootstock is one thing, the right clone as well, the right exposure, all these things need to be thought of. But then that's a part of being sustainable as well, finding the right rootstocks that will be resistant to drought. We don't farm, any of the vineyards I'm farming are irrigated, so it's all dry farmed.
Yeah.
And it's important to realize that if you want your vine to be sustainable for water purposes as well, you want to train them to get their water deep as much as possible, as early as possible. And that's what California is doing now. Vineyards that have been traditionally under irrigation, now they try to force them down and to limit their irrigation so they get their water themselves and they're more resistant to drought. That's one way to look at it. But the reason why also I mentioned the fact that the land was virgin of vineyard here, that we want to keep it as respectful to the environment as possible because we don't want to disturb the ecosystem. So we don't want to bring any damage to the land, and we want to respect it as much as possible. And biodynamic is one part of the techniques or programs or philosophy I discovered when actually I was in Tahiti. Being in Tahiti showed me that there was no temperature difference that would influence the growth. There was no season that would influence it. There was no difference in light, same amount of light during the day and the night, no matter what the time of the year. The only influence on the growth of vines was the moon.
Right.
Now, it was really huge. It really opened my mind in how does this crop we're growing is influenced by the universe, right? How much the universe has the influence on these little plants, these baby plants. It's just mind-blowing. When you're in a northern hemisphere, cool climate, you don't resent it as much because we have regular seasons and so much change within the season that the plant is regulated by a lot of different things. But when you go at such a neutral environment, the only influence on the plants are the planets, the universe around it. So
the tides too, I bet, because you're on an island, right?
There are no tides. The tide is really minimal as well. It's like 1 foot, maybe. Really minimal.
Yeah.
No, the factor that you're erasing all the factors of influence you would have in the other parts of the world. And the only factor you're going to influence your vines with is the moon and the stars. That means at the time you're planting and the action you're going to have on the plant itself are the only factors going to change your plant growth, which is really crazy.
I really feel like you should write something about this because how many people have that experience where you're actually experiencing something without all of the other factors? Because anyone can talk about biodynamics in California or in France, but you were in a place absent of any of those extra influences that would affect other things. And that's crazy. What a finding. If there was ever an argument for biodynamics, there it is, right?
Yeah, exactly. No. So I wanted to embrace that and replicate that here, even though I know that because there are so many other factors influencing the plants, we still have this universe pushing through as well. So I wanted to embrace that and use it as much as I can. So for me, biodynamic farming was a way to go. So we do that on a lot of our vineyards, including my own. And we work with this rather successfully, I would say. It's hard to understand the real impact of it, even though we know that we're going in the right direction. But the fact that there is not as much pressure on disease here in Oregon than it might be in Burgundy, it's much easier to be organic or even just sustainable, just because we don't have all the viruses they would have to fight in Burgundy. That's pretty hard when you're strictly biodynamic.
Yes, and this is part of the problem with the purists who say you can only do biodynamics or organics. The problem is that if you want wine out of certain places, you're going to have to be a little flexible.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the problem with the world right now. We're too absolutist. We're not practical enough. We haven't come to terms with the fact that there's a lot of gray area. And actually, I want to ask you about Burgundy and about the gray area that you're now finding yourself in, because when you're in Burgundy, I mean, you grew up with the idea of AOC laws or AOP laws now. So right. These techniques are etched in stone. The yields, the techniques, the ideas about how the wine should taste, the typicity. So all of that shackles you or it guides you depending on your mentality about it. So my question to you is, you've come here, you're in literally the Wild West. You can do whatever you want. It sounds like you don't, but is there anything that you do in Oregon that you feel like, gosh, I really wish they could do this in Burgundy, it would help them? Or do you say, I'm leaning on all of the techniques from the way that I learned about winemaking because that really does make it better? Right.
Yeah. Actually, we have all this liberty of doing whatever we want. We actually putting ourselves, and it's not me coming here. Like already before me, all these pioneers decided they wanted to make the best of what they can do. So limiting themselves, like restricting themselves of doing some crazy things that they could do, but they don't want to, just because it was in their mind detrimental to not just the quality, but the truth to the customer. The whole community in Oregon really wants to focus on what you can give the best to the customer, and not just the best, whatever you can give them from the vineyard. So some years it's good, some years it's not as good, but that's what nature is giving you.
Right.
You really want to be true to what you grow and what you deliver. So that means if you have a wine that has some damage because of spoilage or whatever, you're going to try to minimize it as much as possible, but at least If it's what it is, well, you have to deliver it that way and not use some crazy technology to move away from it. So that's my approach to it. And that's the approach of a lot of different farmers in the valley.
You hear about these stories of some of the larger producers, really famous producers, Velcorin and Mega Purple and reverse osmosis to get the alcohol out. There are places that do all of it. But you're saying that's not really something that you see often.
No, we don't do that at all. And actually, because we've been known, all the Willamette Valley in particular, as the little sister of Burgundy or the little brother, depending on what genres you want to use for that. We really focused on the traditional Burgundian techniques.
Yep.
Using the traditional punch downs or pump overs, extracting the Pinot Noir the best you can and not adding any taint to it.
Yep.
Let's say our model is Grand Cru Burgundy. How can we replicate this here naturally without any artifices, any subterfuge? So that's what we're trying to do, starting by growing the best grapes with quality clones and exposure and hand-picked sorting and no yield. There is no rule on yielding.
Right.
So I would say 90% of the growers in the valley are growing their grapes with a yield in mind of what Grand Cru Burgundy would be.
Yes,
we
the top growers, I'm sure. Yeah.
Or 5 tons an acre, which is 35 hectoliters per hectare, which is the level of Grand Cru. Mm-hmm. We could double that, no problem, but we don't want to. We really want to provide the best of what we can grow here. And that's another reason why I really embrace this place, because people are thinking that way, and that's the way I want to make my wine as well.
You love Chardonnay, and I have to say that in my experience with Oregon, I actually think on balance, if you go through most of the wines, Chardonnay is a bit easier to make and it may be a bit easier to grow. And I think Chardonnay is actually the real star of Willamette, although Pinot has become the flagship grape. But I feel like it doesn't get enough attention, but it does so well on many different soils. And the style of the Oregon Chardonnay, there's more similarity, I think, in the Chardonnay with Burgundy. And yet it seems like nobody is trumpeting that enough. There's not enough fanfare about the excellent Chardonnay in Oregon. I don't know if you feel that way. And I feel like it's got a lot of untapped potential. People, all they do is talk about the Pinot. And frankly, I think it's a lot harder to make really good Pinot. And I'm not sure that every site in Oregon does that. But gosh, the Chardonnay is spectacular from many places. And yet the thing that they want to show you when you go to places is always about the Pinot.
Yeah. Well, because it has been traditionally grown here, whereas it traditionally is not that old. It's a very young industry here, but still, like, Pinot has been the first one to be recognized. Top quality grape for the region. If you look at the world, like, there is a lot of people who prefers red versus white. That's also another way to look at it.
It's changing, though. It's changing now.
And you see, the first Chardonnay that was planted in the valley here was not the right clones.
Oh.
So their growing conditions was not ideal, and it was make Chardonnay that was not really interesting. Especially the acidity was not there.
Ooh.
So it has been neglected and not looked after for some time until the Dijon clones was introduced in the mid-90s. And then some people started to make some, but there is so much competition in Chardonnay. That's the most versatile grape. It's grown all over the world. So if you want to make your Chardonnay on your own and being known for it, it's much more difficult, because Chardonnay, it's easy to grow everywhere in the world.
Yes.
Pinot, not much.
True.
So if you get Pinot successfully, then you have more chance to hit some niche and than Chardonnay. So that's one of the reasons. And then after the new clones was planted, there was no will to really push this, because as I said, there was so much competition from all over. But then few people decided that there might be a niche also for that. So they started to grow Chardonnay the right way and to make Chardonnay the Burgundy style. And that's why I embraced it as well. And there are several that are doing that now, and it's gonna become the new thing, definitely, because there, as you said, there is potential, and just it's all about acidity, right? That's
Yeah.
what you said.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that.
Well, and not
I would say,
overdoing on the winemaking, which is the biggest, I think one of the biggest problems with Chardonnay is that you've got to get all the growing conditions right, but then you've got to hold yourself back in the cellar. You can do whatever you want, but you have got to stop yourself from doing it.
Chardonnay is rather easy to grow. It's easy to make, really easy. But if you want to make a really good Chardonnay, then that's way more difficult than Pinot Noir.
So people constantly draw, and we're doing it, drawing these comparisons between Willamette and Burgundy. And I don't always see it, especially some of the Chardonnay. Yes, I think your Pinot has echoes of it. But when we talk about Willamette Pinot, there are so many styles and microclimates. The cola note, those wines that have the cola note or the big cherry note. I'm saying like a full 50 to 70% of people who make Pinot out of Oregon are making it in that style. I feel like we need to get a little more refined. The people making it in that style, I don't think are making it in the Burgundian style. I've never tasted cola out of a Pinot from Burgundy. I don't know if you have. You've had a lot more than I have. But it's not a flavor that I would associate with it. High alcohol is also not a note that I would associate with it. And then there's another style, which I told you about when I was there. I've not been bashful about my criticism of the Pinot, that I feel like some people make it so thin and so light, and they say, oh, well, this is the Chambol Fusigny style. Well, the thing is that Burgundy, the thing that makes it so special is that it can be light, but it still has enormous gumption behind it. There's still so many layers behind it. It's not so light so that you taste nothing. So I feel that there are few producers. That's why I'm saying when I found you, it was a revelation. There were a couple of others, and I will say most of them are in Ribbon Ridge or Chehalem Mountains, right, where they're sourcing some from Ribbon Ridge and other parts of really great parts of, I think Chehalem Mountains is probably too big, but it's really amazing, and Ribbon Ridge is an AVA of Chehalem. I don't understand how we can distinguish the different types of styles and get away from this. It's Burgundy. It's at the same latitude as Beaujolais. Gamay could probably be very successful. But there are sites that are similar to Burgundy. There are areas that are similar to Burgundy. And there are some wines that are similar. But I have a little bit of a problem, except with you and a few others, kind of drawing these comparisons, because it almost is a detriment to Willamette to say that it's Burgundian. Because if you'd say that, and then I'm somebody who knows what Burgundy is, and I go there and somebody says, this is really Burgundian and it has no flavor, it's disappointing. If I taste it and you say this is really Burgundian, it tastes like cherry Coke, that's also a problem. So, like, how do we resolve that? You're a leader here. Oh, man, I know I just gave it to you. I'm sorry.
I don't know how to resolve it. I know how to make the wine true to what the grapes. I mean, again, like it's a question of balance. You were talking about high alcohol, right? So definitely we have a different soil than Burgundy. We have different climate as well. We have the same amount of rain, but not necessarily at the same time.
Right.
So we have a dry here. We have dry summer, so we may end up, it takes more time for the grapes to reach their flavor maturity, I would say, than in Burgundy. So we have to push the sugar a little bit more to get the ripeness that we're looking for, not in sugar, but in flavors. So there's a fine line, and it's true for Chardonnay because it's even more obvious between not being ripe enough or being too ripe. It's a really fine line, and people realize it with Chardonnay because that's the backbone is definitely the acidity. So they pay attention to that. They don't pay as much attention on the Pinot Noir. They should. Pinot Noir is also about acidity. We don't have tannins like Cabernet would have. So if we want a wine that's going to last in years, we need the acidity. You need enough structure so it's full and round. And you mentioned color. That's an important factor. But then you want to extract those, but you don't want to extract too much. It's all about bitterness and not finesse and delicacy. But it's a question of picking at the right time, balancing the yield, like we talked about. You can have color and you can have some of these great flavors with a higher yield, but you won't have the refinement, the concentration that you're looking for. So if you really pay attention to all these details, and it's important that farming or organically or biodynamically, have you walk your vineyard more often than if you farm it conventionally. So that means you see exactly what's going on. You see if this row has not been thinned the same way that the next row. So you may have to do a second pass there because it's not the way it should be. Or you need more leafing because we want to have the airflow help the grapes like grow better, or to not leaf so you can, it's going to be a hot summer. You want the grape to stay in the shade so they retain their color and they retain the acidity particularly. So it's a real combination between being the farmer and being the winemaker. I think the difference I would have myself with the people that were here before me is that I'm coming with this French way of looking at a domain or farm as having a one person growing the grapes and making the wine. For me, it's really important that it's the same person can really look at both sides of the elements. And if you don't farm well, you don't get good grapes. And if you don't make your wine the way the vines have been grown, that doesn't make sense. So having this symbiotic element between the vine and the grapes
yeah, but don't you think site selection in a place with so much diversity of soil? I mean, let's just take for a second Burgundy. As diverse as it is, we don't have a million soil types. We have a million soil combinations, but we don't have a million soil types. Marl, there's pretty much pure limestone. There's sand. There's some alluvial. And it comes in different combinations. And the thing about Ribbon Ridge, that as far as I understand, is that it's fairly uniform in its soil types, although, of course, there's some variation. But then some of the other appellations that you go into, it would never be possible to make a wine like Burgundy there. So I feel that some of it is a marketing issue, that it could just be Oregon Pinot. But then when they say, well, it's very Burgundian in style, well, there's soil types in Oregon that don't exist in Burgundy. There are sun exposures, there's wind, there's all of these things. So I think it's a bit of a challenge. Like where you are, you pick the most Burgundian site because you've got uniformity within reason. You talk to the guys at Beaufrere, they'll tell you the same thing, where these areas are confined. And so it's a very interesting thing, because it's not to say that some people don't love that cola style, but for them to then say that it's Burgundy is a little bit dicey, because then it becomes marketing and not truth. And that's a little bit tough. I'm not going to say any more about it because I know it puts you in a bad spot. But you are also scouting land in Burgundy, right? Andre has been in the Yonne and in Chablis. Are you making wines in Chablis?
Yes, we own grapes in Chablis now, but we don't. Yeah, we don't make wine in Chablis.
So just the vineyards.
It's just a vineyard. And in Vézelay, I don't know if you know Vézelay.
Yes.
That little town. Yeah, it's also within Burgundy. It has its own appellation since about 5 years ago, as well. That is quite interesting. Also, a lot of people that are organically farming or biodynamic farming there, pretty interesting. But then beside that, no, I'm not planning on. I have a lot on my plate right now, so I don't want to add more to it. But to your question about being Burgundian, I mean, obviously having the same grapes, having the same climate, environment somehow, cool climate, definitely, and using the Burgundian tradition techniques to make wine. That doesn't make, of course, I will never claim my wine is Burgundian, but the style could be flavored. Of course, like as I said from the beginning, Pinot Noir is so sensitive to the place it's growing. So from one type of soil to the other, it's going to make a completely different wine, no doubt. Flavor-wise, definitely. And then the technique of making it would be the same, would be Burgundian. Then it depends your marketing of people in the tasting room would approach it or try to get some connections about that. Yeah, I don't claim my wines are Burgundian, but they're made in the Burgundian style that may, depending on where the grapes are from, they're going to have different distinctive flavors. And that's what I'm looking for, actually. If all my wines were the ones from Dundee Hills and the ones from the Chile Mountain had the same flavors, what's the point? Right?
No, but your wines, but there is a difference, which is that your wines do resemble old world wines in the acidity and the balance in the clones that you're selecting. And it's, like I said, you're an echo of what it is. There's a resemblance. So I think, I mean, that's why I love your wines. I mean, you're so talented. You obviously know exactly what you're doing with these grapes. And so all of the potential that Oregon has, I see in your wines. Like, I see that if they could all be in that vein, I would really be on board with it. The problem is there's a lot of diversity. I know it's a fairly new wine region, but I maybe would have been more excited about some of the wines had I not had in my head that, like, oh, well, somebody's saying this is supposed to be like Burgundy and it's not. So that's kind of the rub. And you are in a very unique position because you are from Burgundy, you were trained in Burgundy, and you understand what the components that go into a wine that should have certain components. If you make them in a certain way, what should be the end result of that? And I'm not sure that everybody feels that. The last question I have for you, I've kept you so long, you've been so generous with your time and you're so busy. What are your hopes for Domaine Divio, for yourself, for Oregon? Are you worried about the California investment in Oregon and the change of the culture, some people selling? And how do you feel about your position there and going forward?
Well, the big guys, they will come ultimately, and they've been coming already, but they're gonna come more. I'm sure of that. That's like, it's, you cannot go against that, right?
Right.
We just hope they can work collectively with us. I mean, Kendall Jackson came over and farmed some larger vineyard for boutique winery that they purchased as well. They've been doing really well with the community. They were doing well with the style, with the wine they were making, like the quality, etc. They've been fitting well. I just hope
they're the best of the big. There's no doubt. They're the best of the big. Yeah.
Good with the community, and also I just hope the followers are gonna do the same. That's what I can hope.
But for you, I mean, you're gonna keep going and keep on doing what you're doing.
Right.
Are you going to grow any like cool climate Syrah? Do you have any weird plans? Gamay, anything like that?
So Gamay, right now I can source Gamay to make my Pastougrin. I'm making a Pastougrin.
Right. Yes, I had it. Yes, delicious. Yes.
Blend of Pinot and Gamay. I'm not planning on planting Gamay. I mean, I need to buy some more land, which I don't have the money for right now.
And the prices have gone up. I mean, even since you bought your land, the prices have gone up, right? I mean, it's nuts.
That is true. Yeah. It's moving up quickly, definitely. From the beginning, I said I want to stay small because the one key of quality is making sure you stay on top of all the aspects of farming and winemaking and distribution as well. I mean, not being in the tasting room talking to my customer or to you like this. It's important to me to explain what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. I want to stay small because of that.
Yep.
I mean, if I buy more land, I will continue with Pinot Noir and Chardonnay because I think there's so much tremendous potential for them here. Global warming is one thing, but there's plenty of ways of looking at it before putting Syrah or Tempranillo here. The elevation, the exposure, there are more and more vineyard planting on the north facing, which is maybe a good idea for Chardonnay, for example. The rootstock selection is really, really important, and that's going to be the next step. People planting new vineyards, they're really looking into drought-resistant rootstocks. Irrigation, we may have to end up working with irrigation. That's not in the pipe for me right now, but that's definitely something to consider.
Yep.
But not Syrah or Tempranillo. No.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. You are such a really insightful person. I think of all of the people I've spoken to in Oregon, you have a really amazing perspective on the whole world and how Oregon sort of fits into it. And I really appreciate it. I'm so glad that I found you. And I am so glad that you're on the show, and that anytime anybody asks, I always say, the first place you need to go is Domaine Divio, and then you can go anywhere else you want. But it is true that you really do set a big standard for Oregon. I love your wines. I thank you so much for doing what you do. I thank you so much for being on the show. And I'm looking forward to trying your Haute Côte de Beaune wines when those come out as well.
Yeah, thank you very much, Elizabeth, for having me on the show. Of course, our wines are not distributed in the US, so the only place you can find them is visiting us at the tasting room on Ribbon Ridge. Pretty nice tasting room, by the way, with a nice environment.
Gorgeous.
The view is gorgeous, so it's you can really enjoy that as well.
But you can also order them. So, I mean, if you can't make it out there, you can order them, and you can trust me that these wines are just spectacular, really. If you've tasted Oregon wines before and then you taste these wines, you'll be quite surprised at what is here. So, yes, even though they're not distributed, you can still get them. That's the greatest thing about direct-to-consumer now, that people can go on your site.
And we ship anywhere.
There we go. All right, Bruno, thank you so much. You're wonderful. I can't wait to see you again in person and come visit your gorgeous tasting room. And with that, this has been another episode of Wine for Normal People. Thank you so much for listening, and we will catch you next time.
Thank you, Elizabeth.